So the other day I went with an artist friend of mine to the Institute of Contemporary Art, and we had a very nice visit, but it was obvious that we were having somewhat different experiences. My friend, who is a talented artist, was looking at the art with a recognition that I just didn't have. He was able to appreciate the technique, the artistry, the beauty of what he was looking at in a way that me, with my lack of expertise, had a harder time seeing. I could imagine that if my artist friend was looking at this slide with me, he might have a similar kind of experience. That to me, what you're looking at here is an extraordinarily beautiful piece of educational design. So this is the syllabus map for applied data analysis. It's a kind of advanced intermediate statistics class at the Harvard Graduate School of Education. It's designed to help people who have the basics of an understanding of statistics learn to be able to apply tools with real data sets. What you're looking at is a map that charts out all of the activities that will happen throughout an entire semester's worth of work. And it begins with this kind of idealized equation for multiple regression analysis, and then takes each piece of that equation and breaks it down into subsequently smaller pieces, asks the kinds of analytic questions that an analyst would have to ask in engaging with each of those pieces, and breaks it down into further and further subcomponents of the model. It's a beautiful piece of backwards design. It begins with this sort of essential understanding or essential question of kind of how do we interrogate data using multiple regression analysis? How do we identify the relationships between lots of complex elements in a system? And then it looks at a series of intermediate goals. It looks at the kinds of intermediate questions that an analyst would have to ask, and goes through a series of subcomponents to kind of build an understanding together. You can see that each week, this is a slide from the first week of class, a section of the map is circled out. And this week you're dealing with multiple predictors and how to address that analytic challenge. And so throughout the semester as you go along, you can always sort of see where you are and where you've been heading and where you're going back to. And each of these different colored components ultimately sort of fold back together into this larger model that students work with all semester. So it's, to me, a very beautiful piece of backwards design that thinks about the biggest questions of what we want our students to be able to do, what kinds of competencies do we have to assess to make sure that they're making progress towards that larger goals, and then how do we sequence things, how do we fit multiple pieces of complex learning, skills, knowledge, understanding together to develop this kind of larger understanding. To me, when you can take such a complex semester's worth of material and boil it down into a single image, that's a sense that you've sort of found the simplicity on the other side of complexity, that you've started making your way towards a designed understanding of a learning experience. A simpler version of this, which you can find at MIT, but which I think is equally useful in some ways, comes from Eric Lander's biology class. So this is the map that Eric Lander uses in 700 and 700X to give students an orientation to the different major pieces of biology, gene, protein, function, sort of how these different pieces fit together and the kinds of fields that emerge as you start looking at different combinations of these kinds of things. So I think this is another example of what you see at the far end of backwards design, where you can take an extraordinarily complex set of ideas and see how they fit together and be able to create some maps for your students so that they can see along with you the pathway that you all will be following together in a course.